Hey, this is Faithfully Delivering Value, interpreting great books from around the world. Hello, this is Sally's Book Talk. Today, I'm introducing a book called The Biography of Wu Zetian. Its author is a history professor named Lei Jiaji. As the only female emperor in Chinese history, Wu Zetian's fame goes without saying. History books, novels, and films repeatedly tell her legendary stories. Whether it was her ascension to the throne, governing the country, or promoting commoners, all were earth-shattering moves. However, the author Lei Jiaji offers an objective and calm analysis of Wu Zetian. In his view, during Wu Zetian's era, a woman becoming emperor wasn't something shocking at the time. Moreover, her entire political career was focused on power struggles. In governing the country, she wasn't outstanding. She mostly inherited the systems from Emperor Taizong and Gaozong. Next, let me take you through Wu Zetian's life and see what Lei Jiaji portrays her as. First, let's talk about what era Wu Zetian was born into. Lei Jiaji believes that there are two important historical backgrounds that can't be ignored for Wu Zetian becoming the only female emperor in Chinese history. One is that since the northern and southern dynasties, the social status of women in the north greatly improved, facilitating female participation in politics. So Wu Zetian's social status wasn't as low as we might think. Another is the Xuanwu Gate incident, which disrupted the Tang Empire's primogeniture system, giving Wu Zetian an opportunity. Wu Zetian's rise to the peak of power wasn't something earth-shattering either. Let's first look at how high women's status was in society at that time. Wu Zetian was born in the 6th year of the Tang Dynasty's establishment. Before that, China had just gone through nearly 400 years of turmoil during the Wei Jin and northern and southern dynasties. During these 400 years, warfare was continuous in northern China, making it hard for small individual families to survive. To protect themselves, Han Chinese families in the north reorganized into large clans. As these clans grew, the male heads found it difficult to manage the entire family alone. They had to turn to their wives for help. Northern women who gained family management rights saw their status rise accordingly. Additionally, from the Five Barbarians invasion to the northern and southern dynasties, the north was ruled by nomadic tribes for over 200 years. In nomadic tribes, the mistress had a relatively high family status with significant say in family affairs. So, after these tribes established states, women naturally participated in politics. For example, Empress Dowager Feng and Empress Dowager Hu of Northern Wei were influential female politicians at the time. This characteristic gradually spread to Han Chinese families in the north. And, for instance, Empress Dugu, the founding empress of the Sui dynasty, was jointly called the Two Saints with Emperor Wen Yongjian and wielded considerable influence over national decisions. Therefore, women's status soared unprecedentedly, and active female politicians became a major feature of Chinese society then. On the other hand, the Xuanwu Gate incident in the early Tang Dynasty also provided an opportunity for Wu Zetian to seize power. In 626 AD, Prince Qin Li Shimin killed Crown Prince Li Jiancheng and Prince Qi Li Yuanji at Xuanwu Gate, and he forced his father Li Yuan to make him crown prince instead. This is the historically famous Xuanwu Gate incident. When this coup occurred, Wu Zetian was less than 2 years old, so it seems unrelated to her. But it's noteworthy that after this coup, Li Jiancheng, who should have become emperor, was killed, and Li Shimin, who murdered his brothers, ascended the throne openly, directly undermining the primogeniture system and setting a terrible precedent. It showed that the crown prince position could be seized openly and perhaps even result in a revered wise emperor. And what was the reality? Basically, as expected, During the next 200 years of Tang rule, internal struggles within the royal family were extremely fierce. Money coups occurred frequently, not to mention distant events. Just look at the throne struggle between Li Shimin's sons, Li Chenqin and Li Tai. Its intensity was no less than the Nine Princes' War during Kangxi's reign in the Qing dynasty. So in comparison, Wu Zetian's later coup to overthrow the Tang and establish the Zhou dynasty seemed less earth-shattering. But after all, everyone got used to such scenes where one exits and another enters. Active female politicians and a chaotic imperial succession system opened a convenient door for Wu Zetian's later power seizure. All right, so next let's look at how Wu Zetian step by step ascended to the throne based on this foundation. Let's start from Wu Zetian's birth. Wu Zetian was born in 624 AD. Her original name isn't recorded in history. After abdicating, she received the honorific title Zetian Emperor, so later generations call her Wu Zetian. Her father, Wu Shiyue, was a founding hero of the Tang Dynasty, and her mother, Lady Yang, was a daughter of Sui Dynasty imperial nobility. Yet, such a privileged background didn't bring Wu Zetian much good fortune. From her teenage years to young adulthood, Wu Zetian had pretty tough luck. When Wu Zetian was 12, her father Wu Shiyu died. Unexpectedly, right after his death, Wu Zetian and her mother were driven out of their home by sons from Wu Shiyu's previous wife. 2 years later, thanks to her beauty and mother's family connections, Wu Zetian was selected as a concubine by Emperor Taizong. However, she wasn't particularly favored and never bore children. In 649 AD, Li Shimin passed away. According to custom at the time, childless concubines like Wu Zetian had to become nuns at Ganye Temple. That year, Wu Zetian was 25. Barring unforeseen events, she would spend decades in the temple living a solitary monastic life. But history is never dull. After just 2 years at Ganye Temple, Wu Zetian was brought back to the palace by Emperor Gaozan Liji, and the following year she was made second-rank Zhaoli. We're all familiar with this scandalous affair, right? As early as Emperor Taizong's later years, Wu Zetian had become secret lovers with Li Ji, then Prince of Jin. After Emperor Taizong's death, Li Ji still couldn't forget Wu Zetian. So after the mourning period ended, he urgently brought her back from Ganye Temple. That year, Wu Zetian was 27. In the following 40 years, she completed her life's triple jump, from concubine to empress, then from empress to heavenly empress, finally reaching the pinnacle. Wu Zetian became the founding emperor of the great Zhou dynasty. Speaking of this thrilling triple jump, we must first discuss her rise from concubine to empress. When Wu Zetian returned to the harem, she faced two opposing factions, Empress Wang and consort Xiao. Initially, she didn't rush into harem politics, but instead adopted a strategy of accumulating political capital to strike later. Wu Zetian's first political asset was Li Ji's affection for her, perhaps stemming from losing his mother young and lacking maternal love. Li Ji was deeply dependent on and admired Wu Zetian, who was 4 years older than him. After Wu Zetian returned to the palace, the previously favored consort Xiao gradually lost favor, and Wu Zetian became Li Ji's exclusive favorite. Wu Zetian's second political asset was the children she bore for Li Ji. In her second year back at the palace, she gave birth to her first son, Li Hong. She then had 3 more sons and 2 daughters. Except for the eldest daughter who died young, all others lived to adulthood. As we all know, ancient Chinese valued many children as blessings, and a mother's status was elevated by her sons. Compared to Wu Zetian, who had children, Empress Wang, who was childless, gradually lost ground. Originally, consort Xiao was dominant in the harem. To counter her, Empress Wang helped Emperor Gaozong Lizi bring Wu Zetian back from Ganye Temple. But this was like driving away a wolf at the front door, only to let a tiger in at the back. While consort Shao lost favor, they got an even more formidable opponent in Wu Zetian. Realizing her position was more precarious, Empress Wang turned around and allied with consort Shao to jointly deal with Wu Zetian. Thus, the harem became a standoff between Wu Zetian and the Longsha faction. After securing favor and offspring, Wu Zetian began her offensive against the Longsha faction. In 654 AD, the third year after her return to the palace, she gave birth to her first daughter. When the child was about to turn 1 month old, Empress Wang came to visit. However, shortly after Empress Wang left, Wu Zetian's daughter suddenly died. Wu Zetian seized this opportunity to weep and complain to Li Ji. She accused Empress Wang of being suspected of killing her daughter, planting the seed for Li Ji to depose Empress Wang. Historians have debated endlessly about the true culprit in this princess murder case. Records like the New Book of Tang and Comprehensive Mirror clearly state Wu Zetian personally killed her daughter to frame Empress Wang. However, the Old Book of Tang and other records only mention the princess's sudden death without naming any culprit. The historical truth remains unknown to us, but it's certain this event greatly benefited Wu Zetian. Shortly after the princess's death, Li Ji proposed to his ministers to depose Empress Wang and make Wu Zetian empress. But this idea was immediately strongly opposed by heavyweights like Zhongsun Wuji and Chu Suiyang. You might ask, why are these people so bold about the emperor changing his wife? This is because China at that time was a society dominated by family status. Zhongsun Wuji, Chu Suilang, and Empress Wang all came from the Guanlong aristocratic faction. The so-called Guanlong aristocratic faction was a military nobility group that emerged during the Northern Wei dynasty. They were called the Guanlong group because they occupied areas equivalent to today's Shanxi and Gansu provinces. Historically, emperors like those of Northern Zhou, Sui dynasty, and Tang dynasty all came from the Guanlong faction, showing how powerful this faction was. And what about Wu Zetian? Although her father was a founding hero of the Tang dynasty, before that he was just a timber merchant, making him a complete commoner at the time. So Zhongsun Wuji and his group had to ensure the empress position remained in their own hands and couldn't let this commoner woman take it. Thus, the original harem struggle spread to the imperial court. As we just said, the Guanlong faction produced emperors for several dynasties, so their influence was immense. But this collective opposition from ministers to Li Ji's removal of the empress actually sounded a power alarm for Li Ji himself. It turned out these people even wanted to balance imperial power, so the struggle over the empress evolved into Li Ji's fight to free himself from Guanlong faction control and strengthen imperial authority. Revolutionary partnership. Li Zi and Wu Zetian also transformed from a simple marital relationship into a political alliance. At that time, not only was Wu Zetian marginalized by the Guanlong faction, but other commoner officials were also excluded. Therefore, Wu Zetian began to win over lower-level officials in the court, commoners like herself, to support her becoming empress. With the help of these people, Wu Zetian and Li Ji gradually sidelined Zhongsun Wuji, Chu Suiliang, and others. By 655 AD, Li Ji, with greatly increased power, finally achieved his wish to depose Empress Wang and install Wu Zetian as empress. In the following years, with Wu Zetian's help, Li Ji thoroughly purged the court, driving out Zhangsun Wuji, Chu Suilang, and others. Thus, the era of Guanlong faction dominance in politics completely became a thing of the past. In summary, this struggle ended with Wu Zetian and Li Ji achieving a complete victory. Next is the stage where Wu Zetian upgraded from Empress to Heavenly Empress. In the world of power, if one person's power expands, it inevitably means others' power diminishes. Therefore, Wu Zetian, who had already become Empress, if she wanted to further enhance her power, she had to face two major challenges. First, as Empress, the only way for Wu Zetian to expand her power was to encroach upon Li Ji's imperial power. Therefore, this was something Emperor Li Ji could not tolerate. Moreover, as Empress, Wu Zetian's life, death, honor, and disgrace were all in Li Ji's hands. Offending him was like playing with fire and burning herself. Secondly, as Empress, Wu Zetian could indeed continue the tradition of female political participation from the northern and southern dynasties, but she would inevitably be bound by Confucian rituals and court ministers. Therefore, if Wu Zetian wanted to strengthen her personal power, she had to find opportunities in the crack between supreme imperial power and Confucian rituals. For this, Wu Zetian chose two sets of strategies, each corresponding to one of these challenges. For her husband Li Ji, Wu Zetian's strategy was to leverage the emperor's authority to build her personal image. For the court ministers, her strategy was to eliminate rivals and cultivate her own political faction. Let's first talk about Wu Zetian's strategy towards Li Ji. In the early reign of Emperor Gaozong Li Ji, the Tang Dynasty's military achievements and territorial reach reached their peak. In 655 AD, Li Ji dispatched troops to conquer Goguryeo, which threatened the northeastern part of the Tang Dynasty. Wu Zetian became the founding emperor of the Great Zhou Dynasty. Speaking of this thrilling triple jump, we must first discuss her rise from concubine to empress. When Wu Zetian returned to the harem, she faced two opposing factions, Empress Wang and consort Shao. Initially, she didn't rush into the harem politics, but adopted a strategy of accumulating political capital to strike later. Wu Zetian's first political asset was Li Ji's affection for her, perhaps because he lost his mother young and lacked maternal love. Li Ji was deeply dependent on and admired Wu Zetian, who was 4 years older than him. After Wu Zetian returned to the palace, the previously favored consort Shao gradually lost favor, and Wu Zetian became Li Ji's exclusive favorite. Wu Zetian's second political asset was the children she bore for Li Ji. In her second year back at the palace, she gave birth to her first son for Li Ji, named Li Hong. After that, she had 3 more sons and 2 daughters. Except for the eldest daughter who died young, all others lived to adulthood. As we all know, ancient Chinese valued having many children as blessings, and a mother's status was elevated by her sons. Compared to Wu Zetian, who had children, Empress Wang, who was childless, gradually lost out. Originally, consort Shao was dominant in the harem. To counter her, Empress Wang helped Emperor Gaozong Lizi bring Wu Zetian back from Ganyi Temple. But oh, this was like driving away a wolf at the front door, only to let a tiger in at the back. While consort Shao lost favor, they got an even tougher opponent in Wu Zetian. Empress Wang realized her position was even more precarious, so she turned around and allied with consort Shao to jointly deal with Wu Zetian. Thus, the harem became a standoff between Wu Zetian and the Wang Shao faction. Now, after Wu Zetian secured favor and offspring, she started her offensive against the Long-Sao faction. That was in 654 AD, the third year after her return to the palace, when she gave birth to her first daughter. When the child was about to turn 1 month old, Empress Wang came to visit. However, shortly after Empress Wang left, Wu Zetian's daughter suddenly died. So Wu Zetian seized this opportunity to weep and complain to Li Ji. She accused Empress Wang of being suspected of killing her daughter, planting the seed for Li Ji to depose Empress Wang. Historians have debated endlessly about the true culprit in this princess murder case. In records like the New Book of Tang and Comprehensive Mirror, it's clearly stated that Wu Zetian personally killed her own daughter and then framed Empress Wang. But in the Old Book of Tang and other records, they only say the princess died suddenly without naming any culprit. The historical truth, well, we just don't know it. But it's certain that this event greatly benefited Wu Zetian. Shortly after the princess died, Li Ji proposed to his ministers to depose Empress Wang and install Wu Zetian instead. But, oh, this idea was immediately strongly opposed by heavyweights like Jiang Xin, Wu Ji, and Chu Sulian. You might ask, why are these folks so bold about the emperor changing his wife? This is because China back then was a society dominated by family status. Zhongsun Wuji, Chu Suliang, and Empress Wang all came from the Guanlong aristocratic faction. The so-called Guanlong aristocratic faction was a military nobility group that emerged during the Northern Wei dynasty. They were called the Guanlong group because they occupied areas like today's Shanxi and Gansu provinces. Historically, emperors like those of Northern Zhao, Sui, and Tang dynasties all came from the Guanlong faction, showing how powerful this faction was. And what about Wu Zetian? Although her father was a founding hero of the Tang Dynasty, before that he was just a timber merchant, making him a complete commoner at the time. So Zongsun Wuji and his group had to ensure the empress position remained in their own hands and couldn't let this commoner woman take it. Thus, the original harem struggle spread to the imperial court. As we just said, the Guanlong faction produced emperors for several dynasties, so their influence was immense. But this collective opposition from ministers to Li Ji's removal of the empress actually sounded a power alarm for Li Ji himself. It turned out these people even wanted to balance imperial power. So the struggle over the empress evolved into Li Ji's fight to free himself from Guanlong faction control and strengthen imperial authority. Evolutionary partnership. Li Ji and Wu Zetian also transformed from a simple marital relationship into a political alliance. At that time, not only was Wu Zetian marginalized by the Guanlong faction, but other commoner officials were also excluded. Therefore, Wu Zetian began to win over lower-level officials in the court, commoners like herself, to support her becoming empress. With the help of these people, Wu Zetian and Li Ji gradually sidelined Zhongsun Wuji, Chu Suiliang, and others. By 655 AD, Li Ji, with greatly increased power, finally achieved his wish to depose Empress Wang and install Wu Zetian as empress. In the following years, with Wu Zetian's help, Li Ji thoroughly purged the court, driving out Zhongsun Wuji, Chu Suiliang, and others. Thus, the era of Guanlong faction dominance in politics completely became a thing of the past. In summary, the struggle ended with Wu Zetian and Li Ji achieving a complete victory. Next is the stage where Wu Zetian upgraded from empress to heavenly empress. You know, in the world of power, if one person's power expands, it inevitably means others' power diminishes. Therefore, Wu Zetian, who had already become empress, if she wanted to further enhance her power, she had to face two major challenges. First, as empress, the only way for Wu Zetian to expand her power was to encroach upon Li Zi's imperial power. Therefore, this was something Emperor Li Shi could not tolerate. Moreover, as empress, Wu Zetian's life, death, honor, and disgrace were all in Li Ji's hands. Offending him was like playing with fire and burning herself. Secondly, as empress, Wu Zetian could indeed continue the tradition of female political participation from the northern and southern dynasties, but she would inevitably be bound by Confucian rituals and court ministers. Therefore, if Wu Zetian wanted to strengthen her personal power, she had to find opportunities between supreme imperial authority, and Confucian rituals. For this, Wu Zetian chose two sets of strategies, each tackling one of these challenges. For her husband Lizi, Wu Zetian's strategy was to leverage the emperor's authority to build her personal image. So what was the step? It was an excuse. In ancient times, before overthrowing a dynasty, people always had to find a suitable excuse to show they obeyed heaven and served the people, not being rebellious traitors. When the Tang Dynasty was founded, Emperor Li Yuan claimed to be a descendant of Laozi to show his noble bloodline and justify ruling the world. Now that Wu Zetian wanted to abolish Tang and establish Zhou, she naturally needed an origin more impressive than the Tang imperial family. Thus, Wu Zetian claimed to be the reincarnation of Maitreya Buddha, specially sent to be the master of the world. To make everyone believe her nonsense, Wu Zetian instructed her confidants to promote superstition, unearth various heavenly auspicious signs to show divine support for her becoming emperor. At the same time, her confidants urged officials, monks, and commoners to submit petitions requesting her to become emperor. Even the puppet emperor Li Dan opportunely submitted one, saying he'd abdicate for a worthy successor. In 690 AD, when Wu Zetian saw the time was ripe, she announced her ascension to the throne, becoming emperor, and changed the dynasty name to Zhou. After 40 years of overcoming hardships, Wu Zetian finally reached the pinnacle of power and became the first and only female emperor in Chinese history. Now, well, such a flamboyant identity naturally comes with countless controversies. So, finally, let's see how the author Lei Jiaji evaluates Wu Zetian. Lei Jiaji believes Wu Zetian was a rare, ambitious strategist among ancient Chinese emperors, as we've outlined her nearly half-century political career above. In this process, she defeated all political enemies, palace concubines with higher status, court ministers with more power, generals holding heavy troops, and even her own sons. As a woman living in a patriarchal society, how did she manage to achieve what most men couldn't? So the answer lies in ambition and political maneuvering. But since ancient times, there have been many female politicians who governed from behind the throne. But within a patriarchal society, deposing emperors while clinging to power was their absolute limit. Even after Wu Zetian's example, China never again saw a female politician who ascended the throne as emperor. Clearly, Wu Zetian's achievements were inseparable from her extreme ambition. And as an ambitious strategist, Wu Zetian's political tactics were extraordinary. Remember, before becoming empress, Wu Zetian was just a concubine without background or backing. Yet within years, she defeated Empress Wang and consort Shao, and even ousted seasoned foxes like Zhang Sun Wuji. Her cunning methods were truly remarkable. Matching her cunning was her ruthlessness. In her later years, Wu Zetian told ministers a story from her youth. Back then, as Emperor Taizong Li Shimin's concubine, he acquired a superb horse named Lion Mane. But this horse was fiercely temperamental and untamable. On impulse, Li Shimin asked his concubines, "Who can tame this horse?" Wu Zetian volunteered and claimed she could tame it with just 3 tools. For Lion Mane, these were an iron whip, an iron hammer, and a dagger. Wu Zetian said, "If Lion Mane disobeys, beat it with the iron whip. If that fails, use the hammer. If it still disobeys, this beast doesn't deserve to live, kill it with the dagger." Reflecting on Wu Zetian's lifelong conduct, it must be said this story perfectly encapsulates Wu Zetian's life. From Empress Wang and consort Shao early on to opposition ministers and Tang imperial relatives later, Wu Zetian's control tactics were consistent. Disobey and be beaten, resist again and die. Under her bloody rule, the entire empire lay prostrate at her feet. Yet tragically, while Wu Zetian could subjugate a nation, she couldn't single-handedly overcome an era. In early 75 AD, as Wu Zetian fell gravely ill, Tang ministers seized the moment to stage a coup, installing Crown Prince Li Shan as emperor and restoring the Tang Dynasty. Wu Zetian was forced to abdicate and soon died. On her deathbed, Wu Zetian instructed her son to strip her of her imperial title after death and bury her as empress beside her husband Li Ji. This formidable female emperor, who ruled fiercely all her life, ultimately took off her own crown with her own hands. Earlier, we discussed Wu Zetian's image as a strategist and ambitious figure. So, what about her image as a politician? Throughout her life, Wu Zetian had three identities: Empress, Heavenly Empress, and Female Emperor. Each transformation and upgrade in her status signified a significant political earthquake. Therefore, Lei Jiaji, the author of the Biography of Wu Zetian, believes that Wu Zetian devoted most of her energy to political struggles, with governance merely being an accessory. Moreover, when Wu Zetian ascended the throne as emperor, she was already over 60 years old, long past her prime for governing. Thus, Lei Jiaji argues that during Wu Zetian's more than half-century of rule, she barely maintained national stability, and the political legacy she left behind that's truly praiseworthy is actually quite limited. First, Wu Zetian did improve the imperial examination system and established the military examination system. However, these measures were basically minor tweaks on the foundation laid during Emperor Taizong's reign and don't count as major achievements. On the other hand, Wu Zetian encouraged informing, used cruel officials and secret police to suppress opposition, and countless officials died unjustly in her hands. Some believe that Wu Zetian did this to strike at aristocratic groups and provide opportunities for commoners to rise. But Lei Jiaji believes this idea is completely wrong. Look, when Wu Zetian attacked political enemies, she didn't distinguish between nobles or commoners. As long as officials opposed her or posed a threat, she would ruthlessly purge them without hesitation. For example, Dai Renji, one of her trusted chancellors, suffered severe persecution during a political purge, didn't he? And Dai Renji wasn't a noble at all. He was a commoner who entered officialdom through the imperial exams. Additionally, after ascending the throne, to further deify herself, Wu Zetian embarked on large-scale construction projects, building temples which greatly increased the national financial burden and fostered bureaucratic corruption. Lei Jiaji believes that the only praiseworthy aspect of Wu Zetian's domestic policies was her support for cultural endeavors. Wu Zetian and her husband, Li Ji, were both literature enthusiasts, especially fond of poetry. According to statistics, the complete Tang poems includes 46 poems by Wu Zetian. With the support of Wu Zetian and her husband, Tang Dynasty poetry flourished rapidly. Oh, you could say Tang poetry shines for eternity, and their contribution is undeniable. All right, so at this point, we've pretty much covered the content of this book. Now, let me make a summary. As one of the most unique figures in history, biographies of Wu Zetian are countless. But everyone focuses too much on Wu Zetian's legendary side, deliberately exaggerating her political achievements and historical status. And Lei Jiaji's biography of Wu Zetian can be considered the most detailed and rigorously argued among all such books. Additionally, the author Lei Jiaji is famous in historical academia for being impartial. As a hardcore critic of Wu Zetian, this biography is unique and doesn't turn into a dull list of achievements like typical emperor biographies. Of course, if you don't quite agree with this book's view on Wu Zetian, that's totally fine too. After all, after Wu Zetian's death, her own stele at Qianling Mausoleum is wordless. That is to say, evaluating this only female emperor in Chinese history has huge room for interpretation. All right, that wraps up our interpretation of the biography of Wu Zetian for you. Listening notes are below the audio. and we'll see you tomorrow.